flexibility is better than prophecy.
There's already 300,000 consented per year anyway. Is the problem planning? I mean, I would argue it's not.
I think it's part of the problem.
That's bonkers.
Hi, James. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
James, so you're a barrister by training, and now you are working for a master developer. How would you describe yourself, your kind of day-to-day role?
Oh, well, I think I'd say probably about myself, I am insanely curious and remorselessly enthusiastic. Two qualities which, to be quite frank, have served me well in relation to the entire career span, which started, you're right, at the bar. I did pupillage at a set of chambers called Forbrings Buildings, which is now Landmark Chambers, and got to have people like David Elvin QC, now KC, as my pupil master. And I loved that element of life. But I soon realised that the barristerial life wasn't necessarily what I wanted to do. I enjoyed being at more the forefront of doing developments. So I cross-qualified as a solicitor and practiced as a solicitor within a practice called Decker LLP. And then I was very lucky in that I was seconded over to a large-scale Australian developer called Lend-Lease, and it was there that I met Robin Butler and Nigel Hugel. And then in 2010, we ended up sort of bringing forward what was called Urban&Civic. So that's where I became part of the founding team of Urban&Civic, and working with those guys who had previously been at Chelsfield before Lend-Lease and then onto Urban&Civic. And that sort of that arc of going from the bar to the solicitors and then into development and now master development has been an amazing journey. I consider myself enormously privileged to have actually had that range of experience. And I was talking at Halton School, which is the school we've developed on our site at Halton near Rugby earlier in the week. And I was trying to explain to the kids there in year 9, so 14-year-olds on their career day, that actually if you go and pick something today, it is the start of a journey. It's not necessarily the one path that you're going to follow.
Unless you pick architecture, then
but even if you pick architecture, I mean, some of you turn into developers at the same time.
Yeah, it's true. And actually, we're seeing that more often. I mean, I was with a big client of ours yesterday, and almost the whole team are architects, but none of them are acting as architects. Actually, they're all being development managers, doing different things. There's about sort of 15 of them in there developing, hundreds of millions of pounds worth of property. It's a really interesting backdrop. Could you just explain a bit more what Urban&Civic is? Just because you've referred to some of the key founders there, and they can be useful.
So back in 2010, the idea was to create a business whereby you would be taking a professionalized approach to large-scale master development, a large-scale community creation outside of metropolitan areas. So you would be trying to grab hold of the land large enough to be able to bring forward a new place. And of course, there's lots of definitions, sub-definitions of what place is. We've had garden insert scale of settlement here, close brackets, into terms of village, town, you name it. But we set out to basically create new large-scale strategic settlements that were residential-led outside of London, but within about 100-mile radius of London. And that's, was a territory that had previously been taken forward by a few people, Tony Gallagher and Gallagher Estates, but then had also been an area whereby house builders had tried to either do it individually or in consortium with other house builders. And the scale, to give you an idea of scale, these settlements are, that we started focusing on were around 5,000 units over about 1,000 or 1,400 acres of land. So they were big beasts back then. Obviously, we're now talking new towns and a different scale again of evolution in that language. But they weren't really coming forward very well historically. And there was a lot that had been planned but had never been delivered. And then there were a few that had been delivered, and to be quite frank, people were quite upset or disappointed with the quality of the placemaking that had come forward. So Urban&Civic set out its stall really to professionalise that and to be absolutely laser focused on being the master developer of these large-scale strategic communities. And what that is different than a land promoter, because a land promoter stops once they get planning consent, generally on a smaller scale site, and then sells it to a house builder. And it's not a house builder because we aren't, in the main, building the houses. So our customers are the house builders, and we get the planning, we put the green, the grey, and the community infrastructure in, and then we sell service parcels to the house builders, who are then required to deliver those homes in accordance with the design codes for the key phase in which they're operating.
And I actually didn't know, so this isn't a prepared question, that everybody had come from Lend-Lease. What do you think that, because Lend-Lease are much more like a traditional developer, like mostly urban as well, I think. Why do you think it was that this idea was, what were the kind of learnings and takeaways from Lend-Lease that meant that this idea that's quite different was the one that you settled on?
So I think you've got to go back, the origin story really, to sort of the Chelsfield days as well, where Robin and Nigel were previously with Elliott Bernard, and they were bringing forward large metropolitan developments. And the Lend-Lease element, when they came into Lend-Lease, they also, remember, they were winning Elephant and Castle at that time. Mm-hmm. They were bringing forward the Olympic Village on behalf of the ODA, and this idea of creating high density places, and the element of the level of and extent of infrastructure investment that went into creating metropolitan locations was really, really quite significant. So the idea with Urban&Civic was to take those same learnings, those same disciplines, the same sort of professionalism, but operate within that 100-mile radius around London at a much lower density. So you were really trying to create the same great metropolitan places, but within lower density regional locations. And there's some great learnings that come from all of those organisations, and indeed sort of most of our backgrounds. It's unfair to say we all came from Lend-Lease. There was a significant quantum that came from Lend-Lease. There's some of us that have actually worked with Robin and Nigel in all three guises of Chelsfield, Lend-Lease, and Urban&Civic. They're the gluttons for punishment, but it goes to the point that we all knew each other, and we actually all enjoyed working with each other when we then went and set up a business.
And I think for me, I mean, I've been to several of your sites, Rugby, Newark, a couple of the others, and it's just, I was quite impressed really actually by the quality and the idea that, I guess, like you say, there's a lot of negative feedback about development, particularly out of London, and we mainly focus on sort of urban in the southeast, and we actually got involved in one of your projects, but it was this whole idea about implanting a kind of sense of place, community. You put schools, you put other infrastructure, and it's quite ambitious and probably quite expensive up front compared to maybe what some other house builders might have done historically. And I think that idea seems to be kind of in your DNA about kind of that placemaking.
Yeah, and look, there's everybody's got an economically rational business model for what they do, right? The house builders absolutely focus on return on capital employed. They, very disciplined about knowing how many bricks, how many nails, how many roof tiles are involved in the building the product. They're identifying cost savings wherever they can, and they're doing that as efficiently as they possibly can. In a way, it's very challenging for them to change their business mindset and take that 10, 15, 20, 25 year long-term alignment point of view that you need in order to bring forward these very big sites. And that's what we set out to do. That was absolutely the ambition. Now, we forged the business in the teeth of the global financial crisis. When we went and bought Alconbury back in the very tail end of 2009, the idea of somebody going and buying 1,100 acres of Cold War airfield on the outskirts of Huntingdon would have seemed bonkers to many. Obviously, you'll never buy land as cheaply again, is the balance of it. But then even when we turned up to meet the councils for the first time, there was huge suspicion as to what we were going to do. These big metropolitan experience developers, what are they going to do with this jewel in our crown, which, by the way, they didn't know quite what to do with. It had got in old money a B8, a warehouse and distribution consent on for 6 million square feet of warehouse, rail-connected warehouse that was completely unviable. So they just didn't know what we were going to do. And over the lifespan of those early stages of Alconbury, and then when we brought Halton on board, we had to work with the planners and the politicians in those local authorities in order to be able to convince them of what we can now go around and show people. So seeing is believing is a damn sight easier than those early days when actually you really had to persuade people as to what you were going to do and the quality you were going to do it to.
At what point did you change over to being a PLC? You're PLC, aren't you now?
Yeah. Well, we were. So the corporate arc was we were formed in very back end of 2009 as really a private equity backed startup, and then we became a PLC and listed main market in 2014. Yep. And we traded as a PLC until the beginning of 2021 when we were acquired by the Wellcome Trust. So we're now a wholly owned subsidiary of the Wellcome Trust's investment division.
So that's interesting, because what I was sort of thinking about is you're talking about 10, 15, 25 years. Not all investors have a stomach for that kind of length of, capital being invested, and then, like you say, quite possible within a 15-year period that you have a whole cycle going through, and you might not quite know when that cycle falls. So when your units come to market, say, or your space becomes available, it might be at the wrong point in the cycle, which then could be quite painful, possibly.
Well, you have to build your economic models for these on the basis that you will both go through an economic cycle and a political cycle. Yeah. I mean, these things last multiple parliaments and multiple governments and multiple different agendas. So you do need to have regard to that. It's why in now being owned by Wellcome, it's a very logical place because Wellcome have that very long-term mindset and are prepared to invest for those returns to come in over the long term. But, that's the economic model that we operate within. As I say, that means that it's rational for us to be taking decisions on delivering quality on day one, which will affect a small area of land considerably, but then the remainder area of the site will be uplifted over time by virtue of the quality that you create on day one. Whereas if you didn't do that and you were just looking at it as a 250 unit housing development, it's economically rational to focus on what will make the most return from those 250 units, which might not be putting in the same level of quality as it is when you've got a much longer tail of return to be able to generate over a number of years.
I think it's worth sort of explaining the model. You said we put in the green, the grey, and the community, or something. But actually, having been to your sites, I mean, we were part of building one of the community elements. It's probably worth just explaining how much you put into that. Anchoring the house builders are going to build the houses, that's fine, but the community elements that you put into these places are amazing, and it's probably worth just explaining like how that works, what the type of things are that you put in at the centre of these new towns and villages. Okay, so start with the premise that these are completely de novo sites where people have not lived before. They're Cold War airfields. Rugby was the UK's most powerful radio transmitter built in the 1920s. These are non-residential locations, at which point you're going to say that your early occupiers are pioneers. They're coming and they're moving to this site in the anticipation that it's going to get bigger, better, there's going to be more things coming forward. But when they move there, they're probably not surrounded, or they're not able to leverage off like smaller scale developments do off existing places. They've got to create that sense of place, that sense of identity. And that's really exciting and challenging and varies massively per site as to the nature of what you need to do. So if you've got a Cold War airfield, they were incredibly flat, windy,
featureless places, save for some pretty big, heavy sort of military buildings. And therefore you've got to create a landscape as well as being able to create that sense of place. So there we worked with AHMM in order to bring forward an amazing school in first instance. We worked with Hopkins Homes to bring forward the first characterful sort of set of housing there. We put the landscape in, as you say, Oliver, which basically included significant quantum of planting. So we planted about 50,000 trees within the first phase of Alconbury alone. We created bridges over water bodies. We went to the same quarry that the stone for the neighbouring church had been quarried from maybe over 100 years before to get the stone for the bridge. We created new areas of congregation in front of the school, because we've all been to those places whereby the school is put as a bit of an afterthought at the back of the commercial district, and you've got what we used to see as pram wars on the narrow bit of pavement outside the protective fencing that the school had put up for safeguarding, parents jockeying for position to pick their kids up, and generally with a younger child in a pram, and then having nowhere to go. So there were playgrounds just across the road or a skate park just up the road from there. And then even to the point of saying, right, okay, well, look, it's going to be a while before the likes of a supermarket or others will see this as a place that they want to invest in. So we went and worked with the family that run the village shop in the neighbouring village, and then put a little shop on the site near the school in that case to sort of create the aggregation. Halton has been incredibly successful off the back of the Tuning Fork Cafe, something slightly different, which was run by the local family that were doing our outside catering, and we fitted it out and they moved in. And little things, you've done it right. When I got into a taxi at Rugby Station and said, can you take me to Halton? The very early days. And the guy said, where? And I said, can you take me to the Tuning Fork? And he said, I know where that is. And they drove straight there because they'd become destinations and places. They'd engendered character. And that's the fun thing about being a master developer. You really are sort of establishing that. And you make some mistakes. You learn from them, because the next phase you do on the same site or another phase you do on another site, you'll carry those learnings across. I mean, Gannett's Cafe, which is your building up at Middlebeck, has got our office above it and got a temporary little container storage building next door to it. And it's a really simple little cluster, but Gannett's are a great local cafe that operate now within the site, and that storage container has gone from being a bike hub now to being a fitness centre, and those are the things you can do, but you've got to be creative.
You've got to be creative, and you've actually got to spend quite a lot of money up front, which I think flips the normal many developers, for obvious reasons, do not want to spend tens of millions of pounds up front before you've even really sold a site, and you're taking on these sites that have infrastructure problems as well as then having to kind of create a school, a community centre and landscape. So it's sort of a very fascinating model.
Yeah, but again, it's like other people on your podcast have said, when you get a place, whether it be an old industrial building or you get a place that's just a sort of barren area that hasn't had any development on it before, in order to make that transition, you have to be able to create those uses and activation. And so, yes, we are investing significant monies up front, but it goes to the fact that then you have this long tail return. And as long as you're built to be able to hold it, then actually it works. I would say this as well, which is that you see a lot of government initiatives coming in and try and change the planning system and everything else. One of the most significant elements of support that we've had in doing this has been the way in which we've worked with Homes England on infrastructure acceleration finance over the last 10 years in particular. And that has really, really made a difference, because that's the sort of finance that you can borrow significant sums from Homes England. You have the repayment out of receipts, so you only start paying it back when you actually start generating receipts from the site, and you get a rolled up coupon. So in other words, you're not being hit for early calls for repayment until such time as you're actually
get the
seeing
receipts.
those.
You sell them to the house builders.
Exactly right.
And
exactly
so,
right.
could you just do a little explainer on Homes England? Because I think most people are sort of vaguely aware that they help build houses in the UK, but what it
Sometimes.
yeah, sometimes. What is their role, particularly in the context of trying to build more housing?
Yeah. So Homes England is a multifaceted organisation, there's no doubt about it, and part of maybe some of the challenges that Homes England have is because they do such a wide range of different activities. The Homes England that we've interacted with is mainly it as finance provider. So it has lent Urban&Civic money, and we have repaid Homes England, and the government have made a return on those loans that we've paid across to or that they've paid to us and then we've paid back. Homes England also are the government's housing accelerator, and they are there to deliver as many homes as they possibly can, and they've got involved by acquiring sites and then seeking to act themselves as master developer on those sites, or from having taken government land in from a variety of different agencies and then pushed it back out into the market into either small and medium-sized house builders or national house builders. They've also tried over various different times to act as accelerators for modular build, which it has had struggles, there's no doubt about it, particularly in the single-family housing sort of arena. And by that, I mean houses rather than flats. It's more successful in flatted development than it is in houses at the moment. But that is changing over time. What Homes England tried to do there was build up enough of a demand for those modular house builders in order to allow them to build the factories to get going, because they're very capital-intensive type businesses themselves. So they're a very diverse organisation, and they're going through a period of evolution now where you can see the government have backed them.
Yeah, you're the first person that I've spoken to that's ever said something positive about them. And I was worried by the recent headlines that more money was going to be put into Homes England as a distribution vehicle, because I find, or my experience of people's experience is that getting the money out of them is not that easy, and we are in a position where the central government is committing quite a lot of money to the housing industry. Great, happy days, but if it's then going into a vehicle where it's quite hard to get the money out of it, then that doesn't feel like it's a massively positive step. I think more devolution of that money would be much better. So the GLA are better than
But they
Homes
do it,
England
and in London, I think the GLA do it.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
not Homes
exactly.
England.
But then
Yeah.
Homes England does the rest of the country. I mean, it's
Yeah.
mad. Like, you need to be doing this regionally, and I think Homes England might not be the right vehicle to chuck it into in the first place. It should be done, I think, region by region, as small as possible regions, really, so that the money can be spent.
So, I think you should invite somebody from Homes England.
I was about to say.
I think and if this is an advert for it, then so be it. But my case for them would be that actually it's a slightly unfair characterization, because there are some really, really hardworking people in there that are genuinely seeking to make a difference, and they are making a difference. The element of being able to put money out into the market, you need to be able to do it with a discipline and a rigor, whereby if the money is going out, it's secure and that it will be repaid, unless it's going out as grant, in which case that's a different ballgame. But there are examples whereby funding has gone out and the developments have failed. Now, how have Homes England protected themselves? Why have they been so cautious in the way in which they've put that money out? Well, it's because it's our money ultimately, and the other thing I would say is that actually, for a long time, until you started to get really strong regional mayors, they were the only regional body out there that the government could push that money out into. So I think they would also say to you that, hang on a second, we've had partly we've had one arm behind our back because of I think they had something nearly 30 different funding programs that the government had created that they were seeking to administer. And therefore there were very tight definitions as to what might or might not be capable of being done with that money. Now, what they've got now is far greater freedom.
Yeah.
So I think it's a really good time to get them in.
Yeah.
And it's a really good time to be able to put that challenge to them, because they certainly are not short of ambition at the moment.
Well, I think they need ambition at the moment, given the political targets of kind of 1.5 million homes. How do you think we're getting on nationally from your experience, and what's Urban&Civic doing in terms of acceleration of delivery?
Yeah, so I mean, we look at it from we've got a smaller land promotion business called Catesby that's doing a lot of those smaller scale sites that I was talking about. Now, there is no doubt that there is a wall of applications coming in at the moment, and I think you've seen this with Matthew Pennycook saying the same thing recently in Parliament, whereby he's saying, look, I recognise the numbers aren't up yet, but I would be disappointed if by the middle of next year that we didn't see a significant increase in those applications. And changing the planning system, changing the direction of the planning system is somewhat like changing the direction of an oil tanker. You can stop it moving a little bit quicker than you can sort of massively change where it's going. So I think the government are doing a number of really important deregulatory elements at the moment. I think they've got some big ambitions around new towns and actually taking that element of scale on a notch up again. I mean, you only have to look at Milton Keynes, admittedly, demonstrably the most successful of any new town to come forward. But the growth of Milton Keynes has been extraordinary. If that was replicated or had been successfully replicated across the country, then we would be one of the most powerful economies in the world. It's that sort of differential for Milton Keynes. So I think at the moment it's too early to say quite how it will work out. Achieving 1.5 million homes built within this Parliament will no doubt be a challenge. It really will. Getting that many consented within this Parliament may well be very possible, and seeing a significant step forward to delivering them. We've got to boost the economy in parallel, because you can only build.
There's already 300,000 consented per year anyway. Like, that's already been, like, for the past 5 years we've been consenting 300,000, which is the target. Per year. We're only building out, just over half of that.
Well, and that goes to the fact that the planning system, whilst being
don't reform the planning system if it works, right?
No, well, it's exactly. Well, there is an element to that, isn't there? Whereby actually what you're doing is it working in the sense that planning consent is being granted?
Is the problem planning? I mean, I would argue it's not.
I think it's part of the problem, and I do.
It's not easy, but it shouldn't be easy because you want high quality. But if they're already getting 300,000 consents per year, then the planning system's not a problem.
But where are those consents? So spatially and geographically, where are those consents? Because my answer to you would be, if you look historically on this, there was absolutely no problem hitting the targets if you went north of Bristol to the Wash, right? They were outperforming housing delivery targets or achieving housing delivery targets, certainly up until COVID, in number. Below that area, London would be a classic example of where it's massively underperformed against housing targets. So it's slightly simplistic to put it the way you've put it, which is it's geographically varies enormously. What the problem is, above that line of Bristol to the Wash, you have economic challenges in bringing the development forward. South of the line, you have planning challenges getting the relevant consents, and then you're now increasingly having infrastructure challenges as well in order to be able to achieve the delivery.
I think my point was not that it was like, okay, look, planning can be reformed and it could be better for sure, but basically, I mean, we're architects and we mostly work for private developers, and if this was 8 years ago, we would have been doing a lot of C3 housing. We are now doing C3 housing for as affordable housing for RPs, and we are doing hotels, co-living, student for private developers, because they're not incentivized. Private developers are nothing if not, like ingenious, and they won't do stuff that doesn't give them a return. And C3 housing is basically to be avoided like the plague at the moment by developers.
Particularly in London.
In London, it's do anything but housing. So if you're the government and you have certain levers, cool, change the planning system. But if you don't try and make C3 housing more enticing for developers, the planning system could be as good as it could ever be. It could be the Ferrari, the Rolls Royce of planning systems. No one's going to choose to bring residential housing through it because it's not incentivized, it's taxed to shit. And like at the end of the day, building a hotel is better value for them.
And also you've got to have the people that are capable of then buying the units at a pricing point. And so London, you could spend many podcasts, as I'm sure you will do, on the London market in particular, and the fact that it is particular and peculiar in so many different ways. You've got the density requirements, you've got the building safety requirements, you've got the regulator requirements, you've got the affordable housing requirements.
Still got to do urban greening factor, BNG.
You've got to do all of these different things in very tightly located areas. I'll put my hand up and say, that's why we don't do London. Because I agree with you, it's challenging, and that's why we decided we would operate within 100 miles of London, on key nodes where you can come into London quickly if you want to, but also be operating within regional geographies. And I will fundamentally agree with you that I don't think very often, and in my career I've seen 4 or 5 variants of the planning system trumpeted as the greatest revolution in planning that will ever be made. And the answer is, I think we've got a significant amount of operator error in the system as well as in system error. But I think the operator error is one of the things that actually gets under the skin of the planning system far more than the system itself. I mean, I love our planning system. I mean, you're talking to somebody that literally studied it at university, and the flexibility within our planning system. If a decision maker wants to make a positive decision, they can. Development should be in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. The element of flex within that equation is enormous. Equally, people can be completely obdurate and difficult within that
because
same thing.
Because there's so many policies that can be used
there's so much discretion, ultimately.
Can I come in there? Because I mean, personally, it's sort of yet to be proved, but I generally see the direction of movement for the government, who I'm not always positive about, makes sense in terms of the planning system. One thing I'm kind of less comfortable with as a sort of designer and a person interested in sustainability is the green belt. And actually, we need new homes desperately, but actually, how do we develop that? And I'm interested in your view about this without taking away already limited green space within the UK. And how do we actually bring forward development that is supportive of improving green space, not just destroying it with endless sort of ribbon development?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think there's a fundamentally different answer to that question depending upon whether you start from a metropolitan or whether you start from a regional base. So let me start from a metropolitan base for a minute, which is to say, I think we do have significant undersupply of green spaces within metropolitan areas. I think the problem that developers have is that if you require a little bit of green space on every development to come forward, that then creates the challenges that Oliver was talking about for the developments as a whole. Green space really works best when you look at it at scale and you adopt strategic solutions. And I really hope the local authorities actually jump on this and bring forward the plans for green space and biodiversity and everything else at a regional level, into which the developments can support or adjunct to or whatever it may be. But actually, that will be the way in which you address green space in a metropolitan area. It won't be creating tiny little patchworks of things. You've also got to dealing with some sacred cows, which are that, I find it extraordinary to this day that there are some county councils as highway authorities that will not adopt street trees. Now, they won't adopt street trees because they say, hang on a second, I've got no economic alignment to you plant the street trees, you create an attractive location, and then even with an endowment, after a period of time, I'm going to have to maintain those street trees myself. What that misses is the fact that actually those street trees are creating solar shading, they're creating highly attractive locations in which people to live, work, walk, cycle, whatever it may be. So, but you do have that tension within the system. Take regional and then take scale, which is what we're doing. Again, it's why have we done what we've done? We've done what we've done because actually you can deliver great new places with great green spaces. Part of your very kind comments about the likes of Halton and elsewhere is that they are very green places, and they are. The green infrastructure is what we lead with. They are landscape-led new developments. The idea that people don't live next to a park but live in a park is a really nice sort of mindset to try and get into. The idea that those veins of green run through the site. You don't always have very, very big, unmanageable, unsupervised areas of green space that are put in one location, and then you've got highly dense houses in another. Actually, you try and get those ribbons of green running through to create experiences, green experiences, little parks or playgrounds or whatever it may be. And that's the fascinating bit. So, our most recent announcement at UNC doubles down on that. We have recently bought a tree nursery.
Amazing. And
why have we bought it? Well, it's the equivalent of a house builder buying a brick manufacturing company. Yeah. It's our raw material, and so Todd's Nurseries was a very logical acquisition for us. It's based in Bedfordshire, in our geography, and we'll continue to operate it as an operational business. But we'll also then work with the team there to then look at what does climate resilience mean in terms of species selection and where that might come from, which is again a fascinating piece of work that Kew Gardens are doing. And they're very concerned that our European oaks, we call them English oaks, but broadly they're European. There's a podcast in itself, but are actually going to suffer severe heat stress by a 2.5 degree temperature change established by 2090, and you could see significant diminution in the number of English oaks, European oaks over that time. Now, other oak species in other parts of the world have already adjusted to that, but they're non-domestic. And so you've again got a really fascinating debate as to those that believe that we should be making sure that we protect domestic species, but those also now that saying, well, hang on, we live in a time when we're aware about genetics and we're aware about the fact that you can find more heat resilient species. So should you be doubling down and planting the same trees today, which in 60 years' time will just be maturing, but at the same time potentially suffering heat stress?
So would you, in your personal view, and given I suppose you've got a non-exec role as at Natural England, what if you were the government, would you relax protection around the green belt?
So I can't answer this from a Natural England perspective, because they don't they don't take a view on that. They obviously have to take decisions against applications that are coming in relation to specific sites. If I look at what the government have done from let's say a master developer point of view, do I believe that all greenbelt is functional greenbelt in the way in which it was originally envisaged? The answer is obviously no.
Yeah.
But do I believe that greenbelt has been a very successful brand protection for certain localities? Yes, I do. So I do think this idea of grey belt and creating a debate and a discussion as to quality of greenbelt is a sensible way of doing it, and looking at that logically through the eye of, okay, well, let's look at greenbelt across the board and say whether it's doing the job effectively, and if it isn't, then let's say that's more developable than land that is doing a fantastic job as greenbelt, because it's become such a toxic debate and so difficult to engage in because people are approaching it from a vested interest point of view. So yes, I actually think this is a sensible way of starting a debate in a way that we've been historically prevented from doing.
I agree with you, but as a barrister, do you think they should have maybe put a bit more definition around what grey belt is?
Well,
because they left it kind of vague.
So I suspect my former barrister and solicitor colleagues will be absolutely delighted that they didn't put a lot of definition around it, because that will then create cases where you're going to have to argue it. But actually, in terms of the way in which they've evolved that, I think it's reasonably clear that you go through a series of tests, but it's down to the decision maker. It goes back to that discretion.
The appeals, the inspector appears to be the person who's going to be defining what grey belt is now. I feel like it could have been the government to start with. It might have saved some money for those first pioneers that were testing.
Do you know what? You could have done, but you could have equally then created a definition that would have created the law of unintended consequence in certain places. Because how many times have we seen the desire for a tight definition of something then be applied perversely somewhere else. And so I do like discretion. I come back to my love of the planning system.
So you think it was intentional to keep it vague and then allow the inspector to kind of tighten it up?
When your categorization of vague, I think there are a series of tests that we go through. I mean, we've always had tests on relation to Greenbelt, right? You know, very special circumstances, exceptional circumstances. Those are tests that are well established, and that therefore actually by opening that up for the definition of Greenbelt is a perfectly logical thing to do, rather than to say, I mean, I understand that one of the early considerations was the fact that they actually say Greenbelt around transport nodes should not be, you know, high PTAL transport nodes should not be Greenbelt. That should be developable. But that could have been some of the most high quality pieces of green infrastructure that we had. So that would have been a perverse outcome. So I think you have to leave it to decision makers to arbitrate these matters without sort of an automatic switch to say Greenbelt on or off.
No, I think that's helpful. So, you know, as the podcast, we're always kind of trying to look forward to the kind of future of cities and development. So I think I'm quite interested, you guys are thinking on that long-term kind of format. And you've mentioned the tree species that you're planting now. Are they the right ones for 25 years or longer? Where do you think we're kind of at an inflection point at the moment? You've got a massive change in technology, be it cars, AI, and we've also got big challenges, you know, be it the housing crisis, economic challenges, and climate change and all the rest of it. Where do you think our cities or our developments like the ones that you do, which are maybe new cities, might be cities in 25 years, where do you think we're going?
Okay, so you've given me the perfect setup to introduce one of my most often used refrains, which is flexibility is better than prophecy. I think the idea that I can sit here today and tell you what will be the trends in technology in 5 years' time is possible. I think beyond 10 years is me looking at a crystal ball, and my guess is as good as anybody else's. What I think we have to do is we have to make sure that if we are granting a consent for a scheme that is going to be delivered over a 30-year period, we absolutely, fundamentally must build that flexibility in. And what I mean by that is that the consent becomes a vehicle for decisions to be taken over those 30 years. You're not trying to say at 15 years I want you to go and improve that junction over there at this cost inflated against today's prices. That's bonkers. It's just bonkers. And we've seen the changes that COVID has brought, and we are now seeing the rapid acceleration on a number of fronts, AI being one of them, but driverless taxis. You know, I mean, our CFO has just come back from San Francisco and he was whizzing around in a Waymo, and he used his phone to call the taxi, used his phone to open the taxi, got in the taxi and went to the destination. The idea that in Milton Keynes, for example, we've also got Omeo, which is a driverless pod which does a circuit which goes around. These are going to change dynamics. They're going to change things like parking standards.
Yeah,
parking standards.
You get more street trees in.
Yeah, well, except that the LiDAR scanners that these things rely on, if the tree is overhanging, it perceives it currently as an obstacle. So, you know, you've got, this is the wonderful thing, that you just don't know the way in which these technologies are going to sort of interplay. But you do know that life is going to change. So flexibility is better than prophecy. Create planning consents which have processes in them that allow you to look at things on a phase-by-phase basis as you move through, improve, refine, and fundamentally keep asking people, what do they want? It is not right, and this is where I've had disagreements with others in the past, where they said, well, we should have a pattern book for development on day one. And of course, that pattern book is inspired by the people that lived around a site. They're not the people that lived on the site. So as we go through on a phase-by-phase basis, we reconsult with people as we do that. And then you get really local knowledge. We go and sit with the children in the schools and say, what do you want to see in the district centres coming forward? Bubble tea shop and then pub, interestingly, is depending upon how old the kids are.
The pub.
And it's fascinating, and it's really interesting, really interesting talking to people about the way in which these developments can evolve, and they're the best test beds for being able to do things keep doing things better. But you just have to go back to that point about, I'm afraid, being insanely curious, keep learning from things, and remorselessly positive, because there's quite a lot of administrative treacle in the system which can wear you down at times. But if you keep going through and keep maintaining that momentum, actually you can deliver great places. You really can. And that must be the ambition for more of us, to do it that way, and not be brought down by some of the challenges that you've been highlighting today, because they're equally some really good examples, in your portfolio, in your client's portfolio, of things that have been done to a very, very high quality.
Well, on that note of positivity, I think we'll wrap it up. Thank you so much for your time today, James. It's really, really great.
It's an absolute pleasure. Really nice to meet you both.
Great session. Thank you very
Cheers.
much.
Pleasure.
Bye.